rots your flesh off. It is a flesh-eating drug. If you're a dealer of these things, right, you've got a product that sells reliably. Why are you going to start putting in those drugs a chemical that is going to rot their flesh off and kill them? Your money is going to go down as people either quit or they die. You're losing clients, you're losing money. Why would you logically do this? The fentanyl thing, that was a financially understandable decision. But Tranq, it makes so little sense that you've got to think on a bigger scale. Who would benefit from drug addicts dying en masse? There's a few potential culprits out there. So who's doing it? So hello, you wonderful citizen of the internet, and welcome to a bit of a waffle about the opiate epidemic, and specifically about Tranq, this awful xylazine chemical that is now turning up in so many batches of American heroin and fentanyl, and it's over here now too. I've seen drug warnings for xylazine here too. If you don't know, it's basically an animal sedative. So you'd think, oh, well, you know, it's probably kind of like ketamine and maybe it's fairly safe, but no, it rots your flesh off. It is a flesh-eating drug, and the wounds that I'm seeing on like American victims of this drug, it's horribly, scarily reminiscent of the Russian crocodile epidemic that happened about 8 to 10 years ago, where people were cooking up this desomorphine stuff, this like home-cooked codeine stuff that you'd cook up and try and make a better opiate out of. But when they injected it, it was literally, it was rotting the flesh off their bones. It was like legitimate, scariest zombie movie effects you've ever seen, but it was real. You know, people with, I'm going to get totally demonetized if I go into details. Some of the most gnarly stuff I have ever seen on the internet, you know, and I grew up with the early internet, so I've seen some shit. But, and I thought to myself at the time when the crocodile epidemic was going on, I thought this surely would never happen in a country that has a methadone program, because people were resorting to crocodile out of sheer desperation. They were already heroin addicts. Russia did not at the time, and probably still does not, do methadone programs. So if you end up hooked and you have withdrawal to deal with, there's no help for you in terms of getting rid of that withdrawal. So people in sheer desperation were turning to crocodile, even despite knowing what it did. Like the name itself, crocodile, was a slang term applied to it because it refers to the green scaly patches of skin that it would cause. And if your skin goes green and scaly with crocodile, it means that there's like, it's rotting underneath and it's going to fall off pretty soon. Like the whole lump of flesh is going to fall off pretty soon. And I thought, yeah, if there's a methadone program, people aren't going to be that desperate. But the thing with the American stuff going on with Tranq now is it's not people going, oh, I'll deliberately use this stuff because I'm desperate. It's the fact that it's being snuck into all the drugs. So they go to their normal dealer, they buy heroin as normal, and they don't know that it's got xylazine in until it really fucks them up. Because the other thing is, you see so many videos of people, and it looks like the zombie apocalypse or something. People are just standing but like slumped from the waist. It's like the most, like, it almost defies physics the way people are nodding out on this stuff, literally standing up to the waist, and then their top half is out cold. It's a weird thing to witness. That's how you know it is in your drug, is when that happens, and then shortly after that your flesh starts rotting off. A really horrible, scary thing, this xylazine epidemic. But I just feel like people are not thinking about this. And I'm not saying all addicts are not thinking before they go to buy drugs. I'm talking about, like, the whole world is not thinking about this Tranq thing in a logical way. Because when you're talking about things like heroin and fentanyl, if you're a dealer of these things, right, you've got a product that sells reliably. It's not a weekend drug where people are only coming to you on weekends and holidays. It's an addictive everyday drug. It's going to be a lucrative business. They are hooked. They're not going anywhere. So if that's your clientele, and if that's what you're doing, why are you going to start putting in those drugs a chemical that is going to rot their flesh off and kill them, and that they're not liking? Then they don't want this stuff, they don't enjoy this stuff, and it's killing them. Your money is going to go down as people either quit because they don't want any part in it, or they die, you're losing clients, you're losing money. Why would you logically do this? I know people who don't have really much background in drugs just think, oh, well, dealers are mad and evil and they do these mad, evil things. It's like, well, not really. Obviously, some of them, yes, but most of them are motivated by money, like most people. Things like, fentanyl, I could kind of understand the fentanyl thing going in, because fentanyl makes financial sense in that you can make very, very powerful opiates with this tiny bit of fentanyl. So shipping it, like smuggling it into the country, is going to be easier and cheaper because you need less of it. You can cut the stuff to death because you've only need a tiny little bit of fentanyl, loads of cutting material, and then you've got a strong batch that you can sell to someone as heroin, and you're making more money on the thing, right? So the fentanyl thing, that was a financially kind of understandable decision. But Tranq, putting xylazine in and killing your clients, it doesn't make sense on a dealership level. So who's doing it is my question. Like, I'm not someone who thinks deeply about conspiracy theories in general, but when it comes to this Tranq thing, it makes so little sense that you've got to think on a bigger scale. And you've got to think, well, who would benefit from drug addicts dying en masse? Obviously, there's some of the pharmaceutical companies who are to blame for the opiate epidemic blowing up in the first place, the ones who came out with Oxy, which, if you haven't seen the painkiller pseudo-documentary thing on Netflix, I really recommend it. It's incredibly gripping viewing. If you were around on any part of the kind of the Oxy epidemic when it first blew up around about 2008, it's really interesting viewing. There was a lot of stuff that I knew, but there was some things that I did not know, and I was really mind blown by. So you've got, the opiate epidemic, right? It was started by this corrupt pharmaceutical company who just cared about making money. So some of their underhand tactics, they were not employing pharmacists or scientists or chemistry students to go and be drug reps for them, because they didn't want knowledgeable people going and talking to the doctors, because knowledgeable people are going to go, maybe we shouldn't be pushing really addictive drugs on doctors and telling them to up and up and up the amount they're giving people, and people are overdosing and dying. Maybe we shouldn't do this. No, they didn't want that. So they hired people from modeling agencies and cheerleading squads, because they knew that sex sold. They just wanted beautiful women to go and kind of stroke these doctors' egos and be like getting them to push Oxy on people. The second really underhand thing they did that really kicked off the Oxy epidemic and the opiate epidemic after that was that doctors were paid more and more and more and more money for prescribing Oxy, depending on how high of a dose they could get each patient to take. It wasn't just about, get as many of your patients as possible on Oxy. It was about get them taking the highest dose you can possibly get them to take without killing them. And, these are doctors who've taken the Hippocratic Oath, like do no harm, all of that. But this company, I think, what were they called? Purdue Pharmaceuticals or something? They did not give a shit about any of this. They just wanted to make money. And that was where it all started, was this corruption. And obviously when doctors started being done for corruption, they stopped prescribing Oxy half so much to people, which was when people went flooding out, addicted already, onto the streets and having to buy. First of all, people would buy street pills, but that was so expensive that they'd often go, well, look, what's going to make me not sick? What's going to take the pain away and be cheaper? And people would go, dealers would go heroin. That's going to help. So you then had this snowball effect of all these doctor-prescribed addicts ending up on the streets doing heroin. And that was the opiate crisis for years and years. And then fentanyl came along and people were dying and dying and dying and dying more. And now you've got this Tranq thing, which, as I say, it makes really, really no sense in terms of dealers making money. So it's like, well, who would want dealers' clients to die? And it sounds so conspiracy theorist and weird to be like, well, is it the government? Are the government doing it? But the thing is, the government have actually done this before. The US government have done this before when it was prohibition. With alcohol, they started creating alcohol, and I can't remember exactly what poison it was they put in alcohol. Was it cyanide? No, it was actually something way cleverer that they killed drinkers with during the Prohibition. What they were putting into the bootleg alcohol was methanol or ethanol, so these extremely potent, toxic forms of alcohol. So if you drank even a little tiny bit, you would die of alcohol poisoning, and if there was an autopsy, the cause of death would be alcohol poisoning, i.e. during the Prohibition, your fault, because you should have known that it was illegal. Of course there's going to be dodgy chemicals in there. It's illegal stuff, right? You know, government has clean hands, but the government were the ones putting this stuff in there. And do you not see the parallels between this and what's going on with fentanyl and with Tranq now? That suddenly these extremely potent forms of opiates and benzos have turned up in the drugs that people are taking anyway, and they're dying. And the government, of course, can just say, well, look, you know, that they were choosing to shoot up heroin. They knew it was illegal. Of course, there are going to be dodgy cuts in there. We can't do anything about it. And that was kind of their response to fentanyl. And now with Tranq, it's just, you know, as I say, look at it from a dealer's perspective. It makes no sense, but it really echoes the Prohibition to me. Their justification was that, you know, during the Prohibition, you know, no one should be drinking. People who drink, they're poisoning themselves. They don't care about themselves. And if they're poisoning themselves anyway, then we might as well just speed up the process and, you know, the problem will be gone. They'll be dead and it'll be at their own hands and on your own head be it, was basically their logic during the Prohibition. And like that, I mean, obviously that sounds so cold and so fucking psychotic, but, you know, it happened. And there are enough people, I feel like, in a lot of countries who have this stance about addicts generally, who do feel like, you know, you see it on, you know, comment threads, don't you? Whenever there's like a video about addiction or anyone talks about addiction, you get those people on comment threads who are like, yeah, you should just go back to it and fucking die because you're a useless junkie. You know, you get all of that. There are people who do feel like, if you're addicted to something, you've got no willpower and you're better off dead anyway. There are people who think that way. You know, America has become known for this opiate problem. It has become globally known that America has a raging addiction problem. And that is not like a particularly great reputation for America to have. So you can see, or I can imagine people who are in positions of power deciding, well, we don't want this reputation. These people are just dirtying up our streets. Look at them. I mean, my God, you get that even in the UK. Even in the UK, there have been some really dubious policies against addicts because of the fact that they can't make as much money as a town council if there's like junkies around the place making it look like a grimy city. So there have been dubious policies instilled to just clear people out of cities or not to help them in any kind of way, because it's like, well, look, they'll die and then they'll be gone and the city is more valuable without you in it, kind of thing. As I say, think about it. Where does like any logic come in when it comes to actual dealers and people lower down the chain putting Xylazine, Tranq in their drug? So unless you're being paid off to do it by someone higher up, or unless you're unaware that there's Xylazine in your drugs because someone is doing it higher up the chain, like, I just don't see why any dealer would do it, let alone on such a wide scale. Because this is the other thing. It's, you know, it started, I think, in one or two cities and then kind of widened into those cities' states. But now it seems to be in a lot of places. You know, it's becoming so widespread. It's all a bit corrupt and fishy to me, because like the closest thing that has ever happened before to this crazy Xylazine flesh rotting off drugs thing was back in about 2010, 2011 in the UK. There was this terrifying countrywide warning for anthrax heroin. There was anthrax in heroin in the UK just over a decade ago. And at the time, everyone was theorizing, like, oh my God, you know, who's trying to kill everyone off? Who's trying to kill the addicts? Like, what's going on? But it turned out that it was a complete accident. What had happened was that a large amount of heroin had been concealed by burying it in the ground. and anthrax had infected it from being in the ground, and it was completely an accident. And that was gone within, God, I don't know, 6 months. I think the last of that anthrax heroin was out of the system, and I've never heard about it happening again. But xylazine, that's not something, as far as I know, that grows in the ground that is going to accidentally get in there. That is an animal sedative that has been seemingly deliberately chosen for how harmful it is. Because, as I say, there's ketamine. If you wanted to put something, for some reason, if you wanted to take something as dangerous already as heroin and fentanyl and make them even more potent and even more dangerous and even more nod you out and unconscious, well, surely you'd just think ketamine. It's none of these things are really safe, but there's minimal side effects to injecting ketamine compared to xylazine. So, and ketamine's got to be easier to get hold of because it's so popular as a drug these days. So why go for this obscure chemical that no one had ever really heard of before, unless they were in the veterinary industry? Why go for xylazine that is doing these awful things and rotting people's skin off? And I feel like if it was some random chemist who'd gone I'm going to try this, it's going to be fun. I think I enjoy this, let's put it in the drugs for everyone else. Well, once the flesh-eating side effects became known and people started, dying and becoming crippled and all the rest of it, surely they would go, this isn't a good idea, let's stop doing this. Much the same as with the Russian crocodile thing, that you don't seem to hear so much about crocodile anymore. People do seem to have gone, this ain't worth it. Let's not do this. Whereas the xylazine thing is just growing and growing. The other thing with xylazine is that the withdrawal effects seem to be just horrible. I saw someone on TikTok ages back. She was in jail, so she had to, there was no choice but to come off it cold turkey. And there doesn't seem to be a substitute chemical for xylazine yet. Benzos you can taper down, or heroin or whatever you can take methadone or Suboxone. There isn't something like that for xylazine. So if you get hooked on xylazine dope, you just have this god-awful withdrawal, where a lot of her body was seizing up and going into really weird positions. Her eyes rolled back in her head and was stuck there for 24, 48 hours. She couldn't, she was literally blind because her eyes had kind of spasmed into the back of her skull and had just stuck there. Various other horrible sounding things. It just really, even if your flesh doesn't rot off, you've potentially got that to go through when you try and come off it, and that is just punishing and scary and really, really fucked up. So yeah, if you're using anything at the moment, I would say be as careful as you possibly can. If you're someone who's never invested in test kits, I think it's the time to start. I don't know whether test kits can recognize xylazine, though. This is the thing. Surely someone's got to be on top of that soon. Though there must be test kits coming out pretty soon that are going to be able to recognize xylazine, because it's going to be, I think pretty soon it's going to be the number one chemical that people want to dodge in most drugs, particularly opiates. But yeah, test your shit. Be very, very careful. If you're in the UK, there is the Wedinos scheme, which is a scheme based in Wales. They're a proper laboratory. They test it. They give you the details of everything that was in there. And it, honestly, even if you don't want to do that yourself, I would say read the Wedinos page. If you're someone who has major issues with you buy the stuff, you send it to get tested, but you don't have the patience to wait until the test results come back, I would recommend buying a timer safe on Amazon. They're quite pricey if you want one that's going to be hard to destroy, because obviously if you're trying to keep yourself away from something, you need something hard to destroy. But you can get a timer safe and you can set it for a few days, and then you will not be able to access that stuff for several days until the test results come back and you know whether it's safe or not. So that might also be a helpful thing if this is impacting your area and your life. Stay safe. So anyway, with that waffled, do tell me, if you've got theories about this Tranq xylazine thing that are less bizarre than mine, or that maybe make some kind of sense of all of this craziness, tell me things. But thank you for listening to me waffle. I'm going to go away now. Bye for now. Bye.